You're tuned in to RX Radio.
All right, guys, welcome back. Another episode of RX Radio, episode 246. With me today, as soon to be kind of always and forever, the longest relationship I've ever had and will have, Dr. Jordan Junta, DC, in the sort of flesh. What's happening, brother?
Thanks, brother. Much love.
Today's episode, kids.
Kids, children.
Don't worry, we're not having them. So you don't have to call your local authorities. Talk about the myths surrounding weight training and adolescents, kids, teenagers into young adults, extrapolating some principles that we see at the highest level of performance and trying to just cross-apply those through. It's really all the same mess. We talk about common misconceptions that parents have around weight training and stunting growth. I think it's really useful, especially getting up around our age, to have concise bullet points to help offset some of the bad science that's been perpetuated over the years. Really get into like optimization of youth performance, talk about multi-sports athletes at a young age. Yeah, I think a really interesting episode for those of you who have kids, are around kids, want to work with kids. So yeah, look forward to that in the episode. PSL 1. Set to go January 1st, 16-week course, applied biomechanics functional anatomy, taught by myself. We have 6 lab sections a week. Across the 16 weeks, that makes 96 hours of potential lab sections, 16 lecture weeks, plus the manual. It's a very, I don't want to say dense, but it allows us to reach a broad audience. We can take anyone from where they're at and make them better. That's always the goal with coaches, clinicians, athletes. So that starts January 11th. Registration is currently up for sale at www.pre-script.com/PSL1. In-person shit. Edmonton, Ontario, the Vault Gym, December 16th, 17th. That weekend. Following month, we're in California. We're going to visit Jay, Mind Pump Studios, literally down the street from where he's at right now. That's going to be January 16th, 17th, that weekend. December, sorry. Mm-hmm. Yep. No, January.
January in
right,
California,
right.
December Edmonton. My bad.
We gonna make it. And then UK in March. We're going to do a hypertrophy intensive with Luke Miller and No Switch Fitness at Ultraflex in Rotherham, which is about an hour-ish north or southeast of Manchester. I love how I explain this. Meanwhile, the only people who are going to go to this are local to the UK. They're like, yeah, dipshit.
We know where it is.
Know where it is. You don't. So that's going to be the March, second last weekend of March. Blah, blah, 26th, 27th, something like that. Maybe 16th, 18th. What is it?
So the third week is 1920 and the fourth week is 26-27.
Okay, 26-27 in Rotherham, April 1st weekend, 2nd, 3rd, Strength Factory, lower intensive in Bolton, and then I'll be in Belgrade the weekend after that. So if you guys are looking to register, one last thing before we get to it, the Pre-Script newsletter has been live for a few weeks now. If you guys are interested in getting some very concise bullet point information around strength and fitness, change the way you train on a week-to-week basis. Highly valuable. I've been going through some of the articles that are going out. Very excited for that. Head over to www.pre-script.com. Guys, I appreciate it. Jay, final words before the episode?
Thanks for being here.
We're just stoked. All right, guys, enjoy. The kids that are going to stick with it are the kids that make the most progress. And a lot of times the kids that make the most progress are shorter.
Yeah, I can see that.
They don't have to deal with like the growing pains that come with like, hey, this machine felt good 3 weeks ago, but I'm 7 inches taller now.
Yeah, I started weight training when I was probably about 12, and I don't think I've grown since then. But I don't know if there's a correlation between those two things.
So I think there's something to be spoken to from a scientific perspective about this, like something about growth centers in long bones, like because I'm to understand that there's primary, secondary, and tertiary long bones. Now this is reaching back to a test that I probably didn't pass. So like take this with a grain of salt. But like that's a thing, right? Like there's growth centers in like where the epiphysis meets the diaphysis. Is that a thing?
Diaphysis?
Right, where diaphysis. We got a pH in that mix. And growth centers are like when they close on your long bones, that's what like basically sets your height. So like femur, tib, humerus, shit like that. And then there's growth centers in each vertebra as well. And I've been told that it's a hormonal process that begins the closure of growth plates. So, and this is like how I've always logicked it in my brain. It's like, okay, you go through puberty, you got this shit storm of hormones, and that triggers the closing of these growth plates. That like there's like vertical alignment of the bone and there's like horizontal alignment of the bone. It makes this like collagen matrix. Haversian canals is a word that comes to mind. Do you remember this shit?
No, I don't even remember that one, dude.
So anyways, there's like this collagen matrix, and I don't want to get too deep into it because I want it to be a talking point for people to have an informed opinion on this when it comes up, because I feel like we're at the point now where depending on where you grew up. Well, I mean, I grew up in like a teen pregnancy capital of the world. So I have friends now that are having, like, that had kids that are probably soon, I don't know. We're 31. We have some friends that have kids that are 11 and 12 years old. Right? That's fair to say. If you grew up in a lower socioeconomic class, like, you have friends that have kids that are 12 and 13 years old, which is like around the time where you started training. Yeah. Right? So I think it's good to have an informed opinion on this. My stance has always been, when it comes to kids in weight training, and like the biggest concern, the primary concern, I wouldn't say the biggest, but the primary concern is like height, right? Like, if your kid starts lifting weights, he's going to get shorter. And it's like, I love the logic that people use. It's like, yeah, because it's like gonna, the 7 minutes a week they have a bar on their back, it's gonna stop them from growing. It's like, they're not a pop can. Like, it's not like they're just getting stepped on their entire life. So it's always been, it's something that I had to fight against, like with my parents at 15, to be like, look, I'm doing this, like, I don't really care, whatever. But I feel like if you're getting into weight training and you're still in high school even, I would imagine you're going to be met with like some serious mom science. Like, my mom thought weight training would make you short and creatine were steroids. Like, that was like Louise Shallow's inception into like the gym culture. Yeah. So for me, how I'm to understand it is, you have these growth centers. They're in like your long bones that make up your height, which would obviously be like your thigh bone, your femur, your tibia, your shin, your humerus, and then the muscle, or the radius ulna, the muscle, or the bones of your forearm, and then the vertebra in your spine. Right? Pelvis and scapula and things like that are a little bit more irregular. Not to say that they don't have indicators of when those are like fully formed, but those are kind of like your big players. So they keep allowing for this vertical growth until the hormones begin to balance out. And I think I'm reaching further than when I started, but I'm pretty sure it's estrogen that triggers the closing of growth plate. Because if you think of it this way, right? Because I absolutely know kids who started banging gear crazy young and they're short as fuck. Because it's like, I think when you start taking like exogenous hormones, that's going to start to trigger a reaction, which will start to spike the estrogen, which will then trigger the closing of the growth plates, right? Likely why females grow taller at a younger age and then stop growing much earlier than men. Right. So I think there's like some internal logical consistencies there that have been my go-to sound bites for this. It's like, parents will come up to me and be like, oh, my kid's, 12 or 13 or whatever, and he wants to start lifting weights. I'm concerned about it's stunting his or her growth. And it's like, as long as he's not like getting into the old medicine cabinet and like banging a bunch of gear, like, should be fine based off of that logic. So that's always been how I approach it. But I know we had a guy, or you interviewed the guy that owns is it Hassle-Free?
Hassle-Free,
Barbell?
Yeah, Kevin Doherty. Yeah, so he's working with like the youth of USA weightlifting. He sent a girl to the Olympics for Tonga 20. Are we calling it the 2020 Olympics? I think we're just sticking with that. We'll just forget about this in history.
The COVID games.
Yeah, exactly. And just works with a lot of the best youth and junior weightlifters in America in like international competition as well. And these kids are, what age are you when you get into like high school? What is that, like 13? Yeah. He's actually working with kids younger than that. It's a lot of them are still youth athletes, meaning that they're under 13. So with that, it's you know, if it's anecdotal, if it's whatever, these case studies, is there doesn't seem to be any sort of issue in terms of, you know, growth with these people. This Tongan girl that just went to the Olympics, Nini, her name is, she's taller than me, and she's like a 19-year-old girl. So, you know, I mean, that's not saying much. I'm like 5'6".
Hey, don't sell yourself short.
But
I think you're taller than most girls that are in the 9th grade.
Thanks, man. Thanks.
Good for you. I got you, homie.
That means a lot to me.
I always think it's interesting because when we look at height and weightlifting, I think one of the biggest misconceptions, and almost to play the devil's advocate, is like, if you're going to be in a sport where the sport is weightlifting, you absolutely have to start lifting weights early. Imagine trying to get good at wrestling or get good at track and field or get good at with like every good athlete, every gold medalist, for the most part, let's say like 98% of gold medalists in the Olympics will have started practicing their sport at a very young age. There's, you know, physical and mental and psychosocial developmental milestones that happen, like, you know, before puberty, before the age of 10, all the way up through. And if you're hitting these milestones consistently and you're integrating the, you know, the surpassing of these milestones simultaneously with acquiring the skills of a particular sport, you're going to be light years ahead, right? Because if, you know, learning how to move is just like motor, like learning motor patterns. If it's like learning a language, like a physical language, good luck to you know, speak Cantonese now at 31. Right. That's about the fucking hope and a prayer I have of learning how to golf right now, right? Because like Tiger Woods started golfing when he was like 4, or some crazy bullshit like that.
Yeah.
So when I look at it, the devil's advocate, or like the slight skew that I would give some deference to parents when they are approaching their kid with weight training at a younger age is weight training, specifically like barbell training, going to be a correlative metric to the sport they're playing, right? Because a lot of times you could do things without a barbell, and likely this is how, and I remember the episode, it's how a lot of weight training starts, even for those sports that are directly within the arena of a barbell, which that is the skill in which they need to practice, unlike swinging a club, unlike throwing a free throw. It's the idea that, okay, yes, weight training might not have, or probably doesn't have, this correlation to stunting growth that most people think. However, is that time they're spending in the gym, if we're talking sport specificity, is that time best used with barbells at such a young age, or is it best used looking at other aspects of developing skill? And undoubtedly in youth athletes, maximal strength is going to be your highest yield weighted variable. Like if you want to get a kid, and like this is where I think when we start to differentiate, like when we start to get into like 15, 16, 17, like getting into like what we call like maybe the teenage years, that's where I think, you know, training towards max strength or just improving those motor patterns or motor unit recruitment will become useful. But I think at the age of, I don't know, 10, historically, anecdotally, mind you, the best thing that I think in my experience in growing up with like freak athletes that, you know, just kick the shit out of me in like 17 different sports, the best thing that you can do, rather than putting them in the gym at a super young age, unless their sport is, you know, played out in the gym, Olympic weightlifting would be top of that list, is probably just have them do another sport. Right. And I think that's where the argument falls short, is there's never that nuance of like, some people just go, no, like I don't want my kid to be short. And it's like, well, no, I want my kid to be strong. It's like, well, hold on a second. Is weight training for the particular youth athlete, is it going to be a benefit, or is improving like overall variability of movement, coordination, going to be a higher yield return to their development in their particular sport at their particular age?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And thinking about where you get the highest yield at the highest time, right? It kind of comes back to that hormonal curve that you're talking about, you know, as you weigh that against age, is that they're not really going to have the potential to maximize strength training as much at an age where they're not producing hormones that are going to allow them to recover and rebuild muscle that are correlated to having high-end strength, right? So you can better utilize that time, and where you're not going to be very efficient at putting on muscle and putting on, you know, pounds on the total or pounds on the barbell, you can use that to learn how to use your body better. It's almost like, any strength training phases. We want to build physical competency first before we start the process of overload.
So Junta saying, once you get like that little peach fuzz on the upper lip, you got a banger cycle coming. Banger cycle. It's like, all right, now we're going to hit the weights because we're running super physiological but it kind of makes sense though, right? Like, I know guys who scale back their resistance training when they take less hormones because they're like, well, I'm not going to be able to recover like I am when I'm taking more hormones. So I'm going to augment the amount I need to recover from. I need to offset that by just training less, right? So introducing variability. I think one of the biggest things that gets overlooked, and one of the things that I see consistent across the board of really good athletes is, and much of what you were talking about with like the right training at the right time, where it's like, okay, resistance training, maybe save that for when you got the gear pumping through you because you're really going to be able to maximize it. But, in a more neurologically, I don't know, call
the
it
gear
like,
meaning puberty in this case.
It's God's gear. It's God's gear. Yeah, don't be like queuing up just like, here you go, Jimmy, is your 14th birthday. Trend banger coming down the center of the plate. But it's God's gear. So my point being is like there are, just as that, let's call it metabolic. And the way you can't really parse out metabolic from neurologic or anything like that. The overlaps in these Venn diagrams are so heavy or so strong, where it's like in younger, let's say, 10 or younger, probably even younger than that now with like how early some of these developmental physical stages are coming in. Understanding or applying that same logic of like, hey, resistance training, which will have these like crazy metabolic hormonal benefits, which will probably be really good on like the soft tissue side. That's a window of, I don't know, anywhere 14 to 18 or wherever. But on the neurological side, we have the same level of like plasticity and ability to adapt that happens below 10. So it's like, the second you can walk to like basically 14, whenever that starts switching over of being like, hey, now we're really adaptive or really adaptable on a soft tissue side at like later preteen, teenager, and into your early 20s. That is, maybe we shift our training more towards those adaptations where it's like, yeah, dude, your muscles are going to be prime, where the same ability to respond neurologically exists prior to that. So spending a lot of time, inadvertently, the trick was always like, with us being Canadians, was like you played hockey through the winter and then you played lacrosse through the summer. Right. So it was like, you had to deal with having your hands on a stick that was low and always on the ground to all of a sudden you had your hands on a lacrosse stick that was up over your shoulder all the time, right? You had to deal with a skating pattern that was like extension of the hips and external rotation and, balancing on your edges. Then, you didn't have this ability to glide. You were more in tune with like running mechanics. And, it's a little bit more of an asymmetrical sport. So when I see attempts of trying to offset asymmetries of sport in the gym with kids, I'm like, dude, just make them play another fucking sport, right? Like they'll sort it out. I even in my advancing years, I've been taken to like trying to brush my teeth with my left hand. Swear to God, ended up with a thing up my nose the other day. It's like, I'm so fucked. But it's like, as a kid, like they're so plastic, right? Their ability neurologically, I think pre-puberty is going to be all of our adaptations not all, again, the overlaps of these Venn diagrams are like quite broad. But I think going through variability in youth training has historically been Luke Wilson, a kid, he just actually retired. He was a dude from Windsor that me and Lundy, you play football against him?
I think he was a bit older.
He's a bit older, but he would play, I think he could have gone, he went to the NFL, he played for the Seahawks for I think 7 seasons. He played hockey and he also could have gone pro in baseball. So it's like, but it was probably the fact that he played all three is the reason that he could have gone pro in all three.
Exactly. Yeah, and then that perspective almost shifts the conversation that should you be weight training at a young age versus what's the most effective use of training at a younger age, right? Like proprioceptive stuff first, and kind of the similar idea. I don't know if it's an American thing or just like middle of nowhere Pennsylvania thing, but it was like, you know, what hockey and lacrosse was to you, the relationship was like, you know, essentially martial arts and gymnastics for kids to train how to use your body, learn how to use, you know, stabilize your joints, core stability, things like that. And then from there, it's a gateway into other sports.
Can you Google search where Jean-Claude Van Damme is from? Because I bet you he's from that part. That describes Jean-Claude Van Damme to a T. Or still Stallone? That's like Stallone's kid training. But I mean, that's what everyone says. And if you blindly ask 10 people and just go, hey, what if you want to make an athlete as a kid, what would you put them in? Regardless of anyone's bias, if you have a brainstem, the answer almost undoubtedly is going to be gymnastics.
Yeah,
right? Like
absolutely.
the spatial awareness, I would go as far to say the extra physiological spatial awareness. Like this is creating a buffer of proprioception that you will not need in any sport unless that sport is gymnastics. Right? Like if your head is tumbling in space and your feet are over your head, it's like that's not going to be something that you have to utilize. That's not going to be an on-ramp into in any other sport. But if you can do that and maintain that and have that buffer of function, then anything less complicated, any movement simpler than that, you're laughing.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's exactly what I saw in sports growing up. I mean, wrestling was my main sport, so it's like, you know, a more aggressive version of gymnastics where someone is trying to bend you into ways you don't want to bend. But
it's breakdance fighting.
It's breakdance fighting, yeah, absolutely. Right. But I mean, the idea was that, you know, until like a certain age, strength is kind of king. Whoever develops faster is going to win, doesn't matter. But there's this kind of interesting curve of where technique will always beat strength, 100% of the time. Two people that are, you know, relative.
This is where he starts calling out LeBron again. Motherfucker thinks he can beat LeBron. Oh, dude.
First off, LeBron's got to be like, what, 60, 65 by now? He's got to have.
Years old? How old is LeBron? He can't be that much older than us.
No, I think I was in like
40?
6th grade when he was getting signed out of high school, or maybe 7th grade.
You just double shoot for the knees.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm going for joints. I'm destroying joints if I get in that fight.
He's 36 years old. The only joint your ass is gonna have a chance with is his ankle. What are
That's
you gonna
all
do?
I need, dude.
Oh my god. I've seen the athletic benefits that come out of wrestling. The only thing is you have to, and this is like where we start to go deep. Because welcome to RX Radio, back on the fitness train, coming at you live. You're not going to get this info anywhere else. Is you got to start considering the collateral that comes with it, right? Because this is where, like, for example, I think one of the most underrated skills to develop at a young age isn't necessarily coordination of hand-eye, but foot-eye, right? Like integrating your foot position, understanding, like, you know, soccer is, you know, obviously the sport that comes to mind above all else, that or like hacky sack. But if your kid plays hacky sack, you got to worry about the collateral of him smoking a ton of dope, right? So it's like you gotta think about this shit. Because I've been a huge advocate for soccer for that reason, right? That integrated foot-eye coordination, that unilateral movement. That's dominantly lower body, right? Where you're going to get that in other sports, but the fact that you're swinging this, you know, this opposing leg and you have this limited base of support, like it's a pretty unique sport in that sense as far as the demands on the body. And in some of those more plastic, younger, neurologically adaptive years, like prepubescent years, those are going to be huge benefits. However, when we start to look at collateral, it's like if I have a kid, like a young male under 10 years old, soccer, not that big of a deal. If I have a younger female, it's like I need to consider the collateral that comes with that, because one of the most dangerous and dangerously reproducible sports when it comes to injuries is female soccer, young age ACL or full knee triad, right? Medial meniscus, MCL, and ACL. And because that's something that we can get lost in just like this first dimension of like, okay, variability of movement is going to improve options as we move into these the later years of development where strength and power is going to be our preeminent driving adaptation. However, you don't want to get to be 15 and 16 and have a fucking ACL that's already been repaired, have an ankle that's already been jacked up, right? So like understanding the collateral that comes with it is, I think, is something that, a lot of parents can miss, because like fatigue management is something that, to dig even deeper than that. I remember I was hospitalized for a week was it the 9th grade? You told everyone I lost half my body weight. Do you remember that?
How have I never heard this so far?
Zero validation, and literally everyone in our town believes him.
They amputated his leg.
But no, I got really sick in the 9th grade because I was swimming. I was on the high school swim team, which was like you're up at 4, you're in the pool by like 5:30, and then you did dryland training at lunch, and then you swam again after, and I was playing travel hockey 6-7 nights a week on top of that. And I ended up in the hospital, like intubated, IVs, the whole 9 yards. Because literally my parents' thought process was, he literally does not have time to do drugs. Like that was the whole thing. He's like, he's in the pool, or he's got a hockey stick in his hand. He doesn't have a fucking horn in his sock. He can't do drugs. That's it. And I was like, yeah, this is fun, until I was hospitalized. Right. So like there is a lot of factors that I think don't get taken into consideration. And I'm like low key not thinking about not releasing this, because I want my kids to have an upper hand, and I don't want the listeners' kids going for a spot that my kids should get on a pro team.
There we go.
But like, if you can do this strategically, man, these little things like variability of movement. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, that's all right. But that's an interesting point, is that what you're bringing up is like fatigue management and things that we talk about, large scale, like adult athletes. But how about the willingness of a parent to kind of single out the weight room as the dangerous thing, when the weight room has been proven time and time again to be one of the safest atmospheres for athletes? How about the fucking sports that they're playing? Like, why is weight training on trial here when that's not what causes the issues, right? It's on the field that the injuries are happening in younger kids. And how many times have you heard of like, the young girl that's had like 4 ACL surgeries, or like, shoulder dislocations and all this stuff because of these sports that they were playing at a young age? And maybe the issue there is that they weren't initiated soon enough to some of this, proprioceptive awareness and learning how to actually use their body to stabilize their joints and create, positions that are going to be more advantageous for creating and transferring force. And that's the issue of why so many injuries are happening in sport on the field. So it's interesting, the conversations more around, getting hurt or stunning your growth in the weight room, when there's a lot of things that actually are a lot higher risk activity that are just kind of accepted as, oh yeah, they tore an ACL.
Yeah. It's always funny to me, like, and everyone knows the helicopter mom. Like, it's like sitting at the sidelines with like the 2-4 of mug root beer and the orange slices with the lawn chair, and like somehow has an adult size of the kid's jersey. Like, how did you get that? Do you have that custom made? But it's like, it's funny to see those people who will just sit at the sidelines, and it's so funny looking back at like the parents that watched us play sports to realize they were all so drunk all the time. Oh my God. Like the coaches of our hockey teams were always like our friends' dads. And we can look back and now be like, fuck, like why were they always wearing sunglasses? Like, oh, because they were absolutely belligerent hammered every single hockey practice. You know how I know this? Because our buddies coach young hockey players now, and they're all fucking drunk when they go. But yeah, it's like this like and I've seen it from the gym standpoint, where it's like, we used to have this thing, the gym I worked at would allow, it was like a youth membership, and there was like contained hours, but it was for free. A good PR stunt, and you get them while they're young. It's just basically Good Life trying to be the Catholic Church. But if you were in high school, you were able to train at Good Life for free during the summer months from, I don't know, June to the end of August or whatever it was. Mm-hmm. And the amount of people who either A, weren't allowed to sign up, like you said, because their parents were so concerned, or the amount of people that signed up with their parents signed up just to like oversee them. It's like you'd see this like helicopter mom like standing next to this young kid on a machine, just like so nervous. And you see that same mom like drop the kid off the field, like, yeah, I'm going to cheat on your father. I'll see you later. Like, it's like, hold on. You should probably watch the soccer thing, because the soccer thing is way more dangerous than what's going on in the gym. But I don't know. I think it's an easy scapegoat, right? Like, and it's something that we see permeate away from just, like you said, away from just youth and like the preconceived notions we have around youth training. And it's large in part to like why we see, I mean, the NFL is probably the easiest one to point a finger at, why we see so many of these injuries on the field. It's like turf, grass, sure, you can make the argument, but also like load management, right? What is this offseason, like when COVID hit and the training camps got cut and there was little time on the field, there was little preparation. I think, 1 year going into OTAs, there was like 2 weeks notice. And the first fucking 4 weeks of the season, like ACLs were popping every single game. But it's like, well, yeah, like load management works on both sides, which I think is something that can be missed. Like load management oftentimes gets cited from like a quote unquote overtraining perspective, right? Like, wake up at 4:30, be in the pool by 5, dry land training at noon. But also like load management can be seen from an undertraining perspective, undertraining to prepare you for the demands of a game, right? Or like the field of play. So it is really just, you're really dealing with the same overall factors that govern training. You're just dealing with them with little people. That's really the only thing. And like you can add in some of the extra physiological stress of like, oh, like you just started in the 9th grade. That's like at the time going to the 9th grade, like the height discrepancy alone. I was, 5'2", 5'3" in the 9th grade. I literally, between the 9th grade and the 10th grade, I had to reintroduce myself to a girl that I sat next to, Lana Markovic. And I walked into school the first day of the 10th grade, and she's like, oh, hi, I'm Lana. I'm like, Lana, I sat next to you the entire last year in math class. And she's like, really? I was like, yes. She's like, oh, you were that little Harry Potter kid. And I was like, oh, shoot, I'm going to go fuck myself. But I grew like fucking 7-8 inches over the summer. Yeah. And so like, think of that all the way up to the 12th grade. And imagine schools, like some of these Catholic schools where we were at was junior kindergarten to the 12th grade. No. Absolutely out of the fucking question. No God would allow that. Like, could you imagine being 2 feet tall and just walking around kids that are like 6? We had one kid. How tall is Ducharme?
6'6".
Is he 6'6"?
6'6" or 6'7".
Dude, I think he's been. We had a kid who was like, I'm gonna say 6'7", and I only ever saw him on skates, so he was like knocking down 6'10".
Fuck.
But like, we had a kid who from 15, 16. Was 6'7". Could you imagine that? Like, we played high school hockey. He was in the 10th grade, he was in the 12th grade, and he played against kids who were in the 9th grade. Like, because we didn't have like a junior varsity thing. It was like, if you go to this school, you play on the team.
Yeah.
So there's no junior, senior. So you're putting these kids up against full-grown men.
Just imagine like the physiological demand of trying to keep up with that in terms of like adapting to be able to stabilize your joints when you're growing however much, 6 or more inches in a year's time.
It'd be the equivalent of teaching a kid to run by dragging him behind a priest. Just like, all right, you're going to figure this shit out or you're just going to get run the fuck over. Like, it's a lot. And I think it's worthy of a lot more conversation. Like, I feel like youth training has been standardized in a way like nutrition has. Like, well, here's Michelle Obama's food plate or whatever the fuck. You're like, why? Who said this makes any sense? Right? Like the youth training guidelines. And there's people out there, like Doherty, that are doing good work, that are kind of like breaking the mold. But that's, I don't want to say pigeonholed, but that's specific for a population of people whose skill they need to learn is strength.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Where the majority of people who, have kids and their kids want to get into resistance training for whatever reason, I think understanding the timing of it, understanding when the body is primed to make adaptations, either, on more at the soft tissue level or more at like the neurological learning skill level, and be able to introduce the stimulus as they can handle it, is probably going to be one of your strongest predicting factors in the success of your child, whatever, to actually make strides on the field, but also off the field. There is nothing worse. And like, I don't want this to be a gender thing, but like a 25-year-old uncoordinated male, it's just, I mean, times are a-changing.
That's true.
And if he can write a mean line of code, like, he'll probably be okay.
He'll be better off than me.
Uncoordinated, like when you just throw someone the car keys and they do one of these things, like, dude, like, just do yourself a favor.
Yeah.
It's tough. And I think a lot of people, it's like the road to hell is lined with good intentions. Obviously, everyone who is looking after or making these decisions about their child are doing it from a place of them not wanting to get their child hurt, but inadvertently probably ending up with more injuries than not if they were to take a more, cerebral approach to it.
Yeah. And if you even just think of the athletes that you've been mentioning, like LeBron's like 65 years old, Tiger Woods is what is he, 36? Tiger Woods he's got to be in his 40s or 50s, right? He's still swinging a club.
Yeah, so's his ex-wife.
but
that'll age you quick.
But these people are the reason that they are the best. You think of people like Michael Jordan. It's because they've been able to perform at such a high level for so long. So if you don't have a solid foundation, if you don't have these things, and you're getting injuries, serious injuries early on in your athletic career, that's going to stunt your growth as an athlete, especially long term. So
yeah, I don't know if LeBron has suffered a serious injury. Like, a guy that always comes to mind is Derrick Rose.
Yeah, absolutely, dude.
Derrick Rose had so much promise, but he's just got a fucking glass knee,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then there's a certain point where you're not going to get looks anymore, right? Because they know, like, you're just signing a liability.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's always tough to, it is. And here's the thing. Predicting injuries is next to impossible, but also success leaves clues. Like, one thing that always, when talking about like basketball specifically and LeBron, when he signed with LA, there was a video that went viral around like the strength training community and like fitness Instagram of him, like, quote unquote squatting. And it's like, whatever, dude. Like, guy's making 137 racks. He goes hard in the paint. Space Jam 2 sucked, but other than that, like, the man's doing well. And it's like, everyone's like, oh, that's not a squat. One of the guys, I remember Sebastian Aura, bless him, was like tagging him and shit, like, oh, I'll teach you how to squat. I'm like, motherfucker does not have to high bar pause 700 pounds, dude. Like, he just needs to attack the rim. Like, that's all it is. He needs to have a deadly shooting percentage, and he just needs to truck other guys. And also, too, like, the value of pattern recognition, right? Every time he's in the gym, tell you what he's not doing? He's not playing basketball, which can be good or can be bad, right? Because there's a certain skill you have to develop based off of the skill of those around you, right? And it's the same thing with lifting weights. Like, I've always noticed, like, let's take something as simple as walking out a heavy squat.
Yeah.
Walking out a squat for me over 700 pounds is distinctly different than walking out a squat at 500 pounds. And it's something I didn't realize until the absolute load got so much that, oh shit, I actually need, where I could, when I was squatting 500 pounds as a max, I could squat, peak, 525-ish for like 4 to 6 and be like, I'm pretty good for 600. And I could 425 for 4 to 6, I could probably walk out 500 and bury it. But it's like, that difference, 500 pounds on your back at my body weight is quite forgiving, where it's like 700 pounds at my body weight is not forgiving. Mm-hmm. So just as if there's a skill to top end loading, right? A small margin for error. I'm sure it's the same with Olympic weightlifting. Mm-hmm. Like, there's no way you're gonna pull, unless you're that guy. Who's the guy who did the one leg thing?
The one leg thing?
He like stood it up at the Olympics. Doesn't he have giant balls or something like that?
Yeah. It might have been. It was one of the Lees from China. That's not a racist thing.
That doesn't narrow it down. Yeah, but like, the margin for error at 100 kilos is way less than, like, I don't know, what's your 130, 140 snatch for you?
My best snatch, 129.
Okay, so yeah, the margin for error at 129. There's a different skill that comes with lifting heavy weights. Mm-hmm. There's a different skill that comes And, you know, just as it's the same as we talk about with like pre-script and level 1, skill is really going to be where, you know, stability takes the reins. Like there's going to be something that breaks down different at max strength that's different than what's going to break down at max velocity. That's going to break down at like max cardiorespiratory output. Like there's different systems at play that you need to be able to actually practice. And max strength is never going to be, especially in the case of LeBron's age, it's never going to be the training variable for him that's going to get him where he needs to go, right? So the idea that he needs to get stronger and all of these goons just being like, I'll teach you how to squat. It's like, why?
Yeah.
He doesn't have to. Like, he'd be way better off, honestly, probably way better off just sitting on the fucking couch. Because to your earlier point, he is one of the healthiest 10-year players in NBA history.
Yeah.
Right? I don't know if he's ever had, how many games has he missed? Like, another guy comes like Cal Ripken, the Iron Man.
Yeah, dude.
Like Cal Ripken, and like you want to talk
1,000 games or some shit.
That's insane. Don't they play 1,000 games a season?
At least.
I fucking hate basketball or baseball.
Oh,
but
shit.
it's LeBron's, like you said, like the ability to stay, you know, to stay healthy over time is only going to allow you to become better at your sport, and that's something that gets often looked at through a very narrow lens of, you know, maybe college into pro sports. But you could blow that, and everyone knows that kid. Everyone knows that kid that was like, you know, touted at like 10th grade, was getting calls from schools, colleges, like, oh, this guy's going to go pro. And then went snowboarding with my family on March break, and like their snap goes the ACL, and their athletic development was stunted for no other reason that through that time, whether neurological or physiological, it's like you got to take 6-8 months on the shelf. Jason Gander tore his ACL. We were in the 10th grade. Gander was 6'4", 6'5". Yeah, and like, you know, he didn't have the best handles in the world, but he could ball. Like he was a really good basketball player. And think of that in retrospect, a kid who's just like jacked up, juice full of hormones. Was it AC? And he did his noggin too, didn't he? He like hit his head pretty hard. Ooh. Same go. Yeah, he like landed on someone's foot, fell back, and I remember seeing the video, smash his head off of the fucking court. But it's like, here you have twofold. Here you have a physical detriment where he can't really maximize, you know, God's cycle. And you have a potential neurological impairment that comes not only from an inability to like, hey, actually play the sport, start to recognize patterns, start to be able to build your acuity of the actual game, your in-game intelligence, but also just like a pure cognitive detriment, right? Like just getting your fucking cage rattled.
Yeah.
So it's tough. And I think honestly, that as we talk about it, I think that might be the most detrimental thing to the long-term success of an athlete is, are there bumps in the road? Are there points or elapsed periods of time through these, you know, preeminent developmental stages of either neurological younger or, you know, maybe more physiological older, where you just got to sit on the shelf?
Yeah. I think it's the idea of kind of what is enough, right? What is enough strength training? Like you're talking about LeBron James. How much strength is enough? How much cardiorespiratory endurance is enough? And you're talking about like young age developmental athletes. Like I know so many kids, it was wrestling and baseball for me. And guess what I did year round? Wrestling and baseball. Until I broke my arm wrestling and I couldn't play baseball for a season. And then it was wrestling year round. So how many kids are like forced to be on all these travel teams and they're playing the sport all year round, when you kind of have to ask the question of how much sport specific is enough to be, you know, ahead of the curve or to maximize? How much strength and conditioning is enough? How much, you know, cognitive progression is enough? Thinking about these things and not being in this useless surplus, right? If I have this useless surplus of strength and you're LeBron who's 6'7", dunking on dudes or whatever, however fucking tall he is, it's wasted effort, right? That could be more appropriately allocated somewhere else to maximize his potential and his longevity in the sport.
Yeah, I think that with like the parents getting involved at a young age, every single high-end athlete I know that was really good at multiple sports played at a high level across all sports. And I wonder if they wouldn't be better if they played like some sort of rec league, house league for two of them, and then played like the really high intensity of the one they were best at.
Right.
Because everyone, I was travel baseball, travel soccer, travel hockey. And it was like, well, what if you just played like house league where they only practice a few times a week and you were able to dose that and recover a little bit more? So like your off season was soccer where you're getting this variability dosed in a way, but also you're recovering. Because dude, like I remember playing juniors and it's a 45 game spread plus probably 12 games of playoffs, bus trips all across. And I was in the first year university. I was 18 years old. So it's like I had full course load and I would show up to whatever Letty library in a goddamn suit, study for a test, go drive to bumfuck Kingsville, Ontario, then get on a bus, then drive to Moortown, which is even more bumfuck than Kingsville was, play till 3 a.m, get back on the bus, drive home. It's like it's like 4:30 in the morning, you're getting home, and then I got to wake up and write some bullshit exam the next day. And it's like, then in the off season I'm trying to do other shit. It's like, no, fuck that, man. And it's, to your point, I think of it still at the pro level. Like, look at athletes that have a unnecessary reserve of adaptation in a particular element of the sport that could only be maybe fractionally useful. DK Metcalf at, I don't know, 240 pounds decides to try his luck at the 100-meter dash, and motherfucker runs like a 10.3. You know what DK Metcalf never has to do again in his entire NFL career?
Right.
Sprint. The likelihood he'll even find the open field. Go. What do we got? Stats?
I got no stats.
No stats. Lundy is bubkissed today.
He's 104
He's 104 kilos, 220 is 100, an extra 8 pounds. Yeah, he's at 225. They're undershooting that. They got Joey at 215. Joey's a strong 230. Bullshit. Anyways, but it's like Saquon Barkley. Saquon Barkley power clean 405 in high school. What? Right. Like Saquon Barkley never has to do another power movement again, unless that power movement is playing his sport.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
But the thing is, when you become a circus act, because if I'm the head coach of Michigan or I'm the head coach of Oregon and I'm going down to see this Saquon fella, guess what I want to see the Saquon fella do?
Yep.
I don't want to see him do lateral bounding, which would be something that would improve. I don't want to see him doing, some ground contact time drills. Load the bar, Saquon. Yeah. Do you want this? I want to see the circus show that is Saquon Barkley. I want to see the DK Metcalf. I want to see the James Harrison push 1,000-pound sled. Like, look, James, unless they have 1,000-pound linemen, I don't think we need to worry about this. But yeah, it's funny to me how many parallels you can draw to youth training, and obviously we've extrapolated all the way out to the the nth degree of sports performance at the professional level. But I think there's a lot to interpolate, right, within the confines. Like, this allows us to say, like, look, these same problems exist out here when you're running a 10.3, when you're cleaning 405 at 17 years old. That exists when, your kid is playing travel hockey, travel soccer, wrestling, and the other. Yeah. So it's like, I don't think it's complicated. It's just, I think there's an improper allocation of attention, of concern, of worry, because it's like people don't know what the fuck they're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just like the peaks and valleys, like the normal distribution or the sine wave of training, right? There's times when it's low intensity, times when it's high intensity, and within that might go up and down within a year for a professional athlete, someone who's pretty much physically developed. Someone who's not physically developed, that may be spread out over a couple of a year period, right? Where they're training these general physical preparedness traits that we think of. Core stability, stabilizing hips, spine, shoulders, learning how to use their body, proprioception, kinematic awareness, these sorts of traits. And then as they start to become competent in those, they're starting to learn how to integrate those into maybe movement patterns that can help them produce power over time or train high-end strength. And then eventually, when they get to those teen years where they're bumping a cycle, that's when they're loading up the bar and they're running some current through these movement patterns.
Jesus, take the wheel. My favorite cycles. Yeah. Honestly, you lost me a little bit with sine wave because I'm like, man, you went straight Texas Instruments.
I don't know if that's the right word.
I remember using those graphing calculators. Remember they'd hand them out.
Oh yeah.
And I sine and cosine, SOHCAHTOA. The only thing I remember. 10th grade. Shout out Big Willie style.
Different things.
That's
SOHCAHTOA and sine waves and all that.
Yeah. No, that's the same. I know.
It's all the same.
It's all the same. It's all fucking circles, man. That's how my brain registers it.
That's it.
But no, look, and the weird thing to me is, and I look at this from my kids are going to be Spartans. I don't know a damn, like, I'm not having kids anytime soon. Good.
Yeah.
But it's like I watch parents go head first, swan dive into the most ridiculous nuance. Like the amount of books people read around kids is insane to me. And none of those books include a progression. I want to write a book like how to get your kid in the NFL. That's going to be my book. So it's like you got your baby book, and then you got like, you're teaching your baby Mandarin at a young age book. It's like, oh, well, we're going to put him in a Montessori school. It's like, yeah, sure. Like that's going to fucking matter. But it's like there should be like in the baby book section, it's like how to develop a monster. Because I've seen the weird nuanced corners that people go into. Like I always think of Meet the Fockers, where Robert De Niro's got like the whole fucking Einstein school thing for like the kid who's like 6 months old. And it's like every parent does that. They're just like, oh, I want the best for my kid. And it's like, okay, well then actually learn what that is, right? I go walk down any baby aisle and it's like, I will buy all of my groceries. And I will walk by the aisle. It takes about like 20, 30 minutes to go through the store, especially if it's a new store. And I'll just see one parent looking at the label and looking at their phone of something and just being like, glycerol maltodextrin. And they'll go like type it into their phone, and then they'll look at the next ingredients and be like, sorbitol. Okay. And they'll type it into their phone, and like they'll do all of this shit. It's like your kid's a fucking trash can. Like it'll eat glue off the floor, and you're sitting there Google searching maltodextrin. Like, the fuck out of here. And then when Timmy's fucking 10, they're like, no, you can't play soccer or whatever. It's like, God, you're so the fact that this is such a blind spot for people, but their intentions are so good. It's like, man, if you guys aligned your intentions with good information, we would be smashing world records every Olympics.
Yeah, absolutely agree.
I'm gonna save this one. I'm gonna save this one. I'm gonna be like, all right, episode 2, whatever this is. Yeah, just like I'm gonna listen to the stuff I said because I'm gonna be so like, because I know what's gonna happen. Because I see this with my friends that are logical. The second people have kids, they just lose their mind. Right? They're crawling around in them. My sister is a physician in an emergency room. And she comes, and I swear to God, she comes home and she reads at a 2nd grade level. Just because there's so many like Clifford the Big Red Dog. She just comes home and she lives on the floor. She just crawls around with her 2-year-old. I'm like, this is insane to me. So I'm going to I'm going to run this back. And if you have kids, I'm sorry, but if you want to make sure, that they go places, it's like, put some effort into it. Cause look, I'm 31. Let's say I have a kid before I'm 35, 18 years, entry level, probably league minimum for most is going to be $1 million by then. It's something like 560, 580 right now in the NFL. With inflation, 20 years, easy.
6%.
That's my retirement fund. This is what fuck your Shiba coin and your Ethereum. It's like, I'm invested in this shit. This little motherfucker, I'm going to be front row with the visor on, and I'm just going to be laughing all the way to the bank. All right, so we're going to wrap for today, guys. Appreciate you hanging out. We're going to be pushing more back into the fitness stuff because we barely know shit about anything. True. So at least we're going to talk about the things we kind of know stuff about. This will go out next week, I think, if I'm not mistaken. Pre-Script Level 1. Off for sale currently. Head over to www.pre-script.com/PSL1. 16-week course. I think we're at 96 hours of potential lab time in that 6 weeks. Crazy.
Wow.
Keep an eye out for some cool stuff. In-person intensives. We're going to be in Edmonton. Junta's coming up as well. He's going to do another border run. I'm going to have to write him a hall pass from the airport again.
Hopefully they'll let me in.
If you work at customs at the Edmonton airport, just let the guy go. December, I want to say it's like 17th, 18th weekend
18th,
there in Edmonton. We're in California at the Mind Pump Studios, January 16th, 15th, 16th. We'll be in the UK. Just announced Hypertrophy Intensive with No Switch Fitness and Luke Miller. Gent is going to jump the pond as well. So if you work at UK Customs, let us both in. And that's going to be Hypertrophy Intensive at Ultra Flex in Rotherham. That's Kuba's gym up there, just, I want to say, southeast of Manchester. We're going to be the weekend after that, Lower Body Intensive at Strength Factory in Bolton, which is a little bit closer to Manchester. And I'm going to be in Serbia the week after that, as you do, at Win Your Way in Belgrade. And yeah, level 1 is up for sale currently. Barbell is coming soon, so keep an eye out for that. Am I missing anything?
Couple new courses on the way. TBD. Yeah.
TBD.
Be looking forward to seeing those.
Newsletter. We're going to run it back in the intro. Pre-Script newsletter. Head over to the website. Get on that. We have cool stuff coming down the pipe from all of our coaches and some internal stuff as well. Really good stuff week over week. Get that directly to your inbox. Sounds smart.
Yeah. Love it.
That's the goal, right? All right, guys. Appreciate your time. Lundy.
All right. Thanks for listening.